Hello Year 4. So in our first part to today's lesson, I asked you to have a think about why do you think it rains so much in the rainforest. So a lot of the rainfall in these tropical rainforests is known as convectional rainfall. And this means that the water that falls from the clouds heats up and evaporates very quickly, which creates rainfall again. Now because it's so hot in a tropical rainforest, this is known as part of the water cycle, and this process happens even quicker than it normally would. Now, this theory of this convectional rainfall is shown in the diagram below. Can you just pause the video and have a think? Can you explain what's happening in this diagram, and then we'll go through it together? So pause the video and have a think, please. Okay, so in this diagram, it is showing the water cycle. So if we start at number 1 here, so thinking of the clouds. Now, when it rains, so that form of precipitation, that water coming from the clouds in the form of rain, the water collects in the canopy. Now, the canopy is the highest area of a tropical rainforest. And because the canopy is so thick, you can see all those trees, not much of the rain reaches the forest floor, which is down here. And we're going to be looking at the layers of the rainforest very soon. So it rains and the water collects in the canopy. Now, when the clouds go and the sun is shining again, the heat from the sun heats up this rain and makes it evaporate. So it turns it into a water vapour. So this turns it from a liquid into a gas. And plants in the canopy also release this same water vapour through a period called transpiration, so a process called transpiration, which is how it moves through the plants. How water moves through the plants is known as transpiration. So at the moment, we have 2 types of water vapour. So we've got one type of water vapour that's made from the rainwater, from where the sun has heated the rain that's fell in the canopy and evaporated it into water vapour, but also the water vapour from the plant vapour that they have released through this period of transpiration. This water vapour then condenses into the clouds. So as we can see, this arrow here is showing the water vapour condensing into the clouds as it gets a bit cooler. Now, when the water vapour in the clouds has cooled enough, it turns into rain again, and the whole process begins again. And that is part of the water cycle. Now, because the rainforest is so hot, the water evaporates and condenses quicker, which makes it rain every day. Because the rain that falls one day is heated into water vapour and cooled into the clouds quickly, ready for the next day's rainfall. And we know that because of where tropical rainforests are, that they're near the equator and that's a really hot area of the world, that this whole process and the cycle is a lot faster and happens at a lot quicker rate, which is why the rainforest rains so much. It's all down to the process of the water cycle. Now, rainforests are really important to the water cycle because the water vapour that plants give out is really important, because this creates clouds, which in turn creates precipitation, giving rain. Because without the plants of the rainforest, that it won't give off water vapour, so these water levels can drop because the water cycle wouldn't be going round in its cycle. And this can lead to drought in the surrounding areas. Now, if you have a look at this picture, what do you think drought means? You can see there's not many plants here. There's no trees. There's not many plants at all. And this idea of drought means that it can be very dry, okay? And that's not very good for the surrounding areas. And this can especially happen if there's been large areas of trees that have been chopped down. Do you remember what happens when trees are chopped down in a forest? Well done, it's called deforestation. So this idea of trees being chopped down to use for wood or to build other things, make use of the land for other things, this can lead to drought, and which is where these clouds are not producing enough water for the rainforest because there's no plants to give off the water vapour to create the clouds in the first place. Now, we have learnt a lot of information today, and I've got a quiz for you here of 5 questions which sum up your knowledge for today. So can you pause the video and have a go at these following 5 questions, please? Okay, do you remember what precipitation is? Well, precipitation was that water that was released from the clouds. It can be released in a variety of forms, including rain, snow, sleet, or hail. Fantastic. So number 2, what is the climate in the UK? Do you remember what climate we have in the UK? Well done, we have a temperate climate. Do you remember what temperate climate means? That's right, which means it's never extremely hot and it's never extremely cold. Well done. Now, thinking back right to the start of the lesson, do you remember the difference between climate and weather? Well done. So a climate is reflecting an average daily weather for an extended period of time. So the climate stays the same for months, years, and the weather reflects short-term conditions of the atmosphere. So it could predict that it would be hot today, but maybe raining tomorrow and maybe snowing the next day. So the weather consistently changes, whereas the climate stays the same for a really long period of time. So thinking about climate then, what is the climate in a tropical rainforest like? Do you remember? Fantastic. So it has a tropical climate all year round. This means, from our first slide today, that temperatures are really hot and humid all year, but it does usually rain every day. Do you remember the 2 types of seasons in a tropical rainforest? That's right, it was the wet season and the dry season. But we learned that even the dry season is still wet, so we could call them the wet season and the not so wet season. Finally then, you're doing so well. What does the term convectional rainfall mean? Do you remember? We can link this to the idea of the water cycle. So, the convectional rainfall means that the water that falls from the clouds heats up and evaporates quickly, which creates rainfall again. So it's all about this idea of the water cycle, that the water that falls from the clouds in the form of precipitation heats up, evaporates, and goes back into the clouds, and when it's cooled enough, it creates that rainfall again. You have done some fantastic work today. I'm going to explain your task for today. So, the first task is this worksheet 3B. So it says, can you use the data to complete these graphs to show the average temperatures and rainfall in a tropical rainforest? So this first one is looking at a line graph. Now I've started the first one for you, as I know we haven't looked at graphs yet in year 4, but I assume that you've looked at them in previous year groups, but let's have a bit of a recap. So we can see here that we've got the months and the temperatures. And what you need to do is you need to look along the month section and think, oh, I'm looking at January 1st, and I'm going to go up to where I think 27 degrees is. And I think it's here, so I'm going to put a dot here. And then I'm going to put another dot where I think February is. Oh, I can see February is also 27, so I'm going to put a dot here too. And then I think of March, and I can see that March is 26 degrees. And I can see that 26 is here, so I'm going to put a dot here. When you've put your dots in the correct places for each of the months, you can then connect them a bit like a dot to dot, but not really, because you're going to just join them in a really smooth motion. So your graph should show overall maybe a dip in the rainfall, in the temperature, sorry, or it may show a consistent temperature based on what we've looked at. Have a think at what it might look like. The second example is a bar graph showing the average rainfall in millimetres. So you can see here that I've started you off for January and February. I can see that January is 260, so I'd find January on my graph and go up to all the way where I think it's 260, and I think it's about here. So then I'd draw with a ruler my bar. And then I'd leave a gap so I can clearly see that my next one is February, and I can see that February is 288 millimetres. So I'd go all the way up to where I think 280 is, 88. I can see that it's not going to be here because that's 350. It's not going to go past this line because that's 300. So I've had a rough estimate, a guess, and I think 288 is around here. So I'm going to draw my bar. And that's what you would do for the rest of the months. Now, when you've completed these 2 graphs, there are a set of questions. So just like we discussed in our lesson, you're going to be thinking which months have the highest temperature. So that's where you need to look back at your temperature graph and think which months have the highest and which months have the lowest. You're then thinking, what is the average temperature for the year? And there's a little note here. You can work this out by adding up all 12 temperatures. So you add up all of these numbers, don't miss a single one out, and then you divide them by 12 because you have 12 months. Please use a calculator. I'm not expecting you to do this in your head or using our division methods just yet, don't you worry. And then it moves on to thinking about rainfall. So it's thinking what month has the most and what month is the driest. So we'd look here, we'd look at the most and we'd look at the driest, and then you put those months in there. How much rainfall is there in a whole year? We might work this out by adding up all of our rainfall amounts, and you can also use a calculator for this too. What is the difference in the amount of rainfall between January and July? To find the difference, you look at the rainfall in January and July and you take away the smallest number from the largest. So you'd be taking away July from January, and you can also use a calculator or you can do it with your methods that we've been learning in maths. That is the same for question number 8 too. The final 2 questions are questions for you to just have a think about. So which month do you think would be best to visit a tropical rainforest, and which month do you think would be the worst? But remember, it's asking you why, so you need to be prepared to explain your answers. Those are your 2 tasks for today. Don't forget to complete the graphs first of all, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you have found all about a tropical rainforest. Have a lovely rest of your day, and I will see you in our next lesson. Bye, Year 4.